This year, during the BAFTAs, which is Britain's biggest night in film, Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo walked out on stage. These are two of the most celebrated Black actors working today, and they walked out to present the award for Best Visual Effects. And then from the audience, the N word. The room goes quiet, the actors pause because they're professionals, they continue. The man who shouted it, John Davidson, a Tourette syndrome campaigner, and the real life inspiration behind the BAFTA nominated film I Swear, a movie literally about his life with Tourette's, is the one who utters that word. And so the internet explodes. Half of the comments say that's disgusting and there's no excuse. And the other half say if he can't help it, then people need to educate themselves on what Tourette's is. Can a brain disorder make you racist? To answer this question, let's start from the beginning because most people's understanding of Tourette syndrome comes from comedy sketches and viral videos, and that has caused a lot of damage. Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition, it's not psychiatric, not behavioral, neurological, meaning it originates in the brain's wiring, not in someone's personality or choices. It was first formally described in 1885 by a French neurologist named Georges Gilles de la Tourette, which is why we have the very French sounding name attached to a condition that affects people all over the world. What defines Tourette's clinically are tics. Tics are sudden, repetitive, involuntary movements or sounds. The key word is involuntary. The person is not choosing to do this. To be diagnosed with Tourette specifically, you need multiple motor tics, things like blinking, grimacing, shoulder shrugging, head jerking, and at least one vocal tic, meaning sounds or words that come out without warning. And these have to be present for more than a year. For most people, onset is typically in childhood, usually between the ages of 5 and 7. Some people improve significantly by adulthood, others continue experiencing symptoms throughout their lives. About 1 in every 160 children is estimated to have Tourette's. So it's far more common than most people realize. Now, here's where it gets important because Tourette's exists on a spectrum. Most people with Tourette's have mild tics. We're talking blinking, throat clearing, a small repetitive movement. The person sitting next to you on the bus might have Tourette's and you would never know. The dramatic, disruptive presentations you've seen online, that's the more severe end of the spectrum. Even within the vocal tic category, most people are producing sounds, not words. So things like humming, sniffing, clicking. Words come later and with more severity. So when people imagine Tourette's as synonymous with screaming offensive words, that's a very specific, very rare subset of the condition. And that subset has a name. And it comes from the Greek word kopros, meaning feces, and lalia, meaning speech. Very charming, I know. Coprolalia is the involuntary utterance of obscene, taboo, or socially unacceptable words and phrases. It's the symptom that gave Tourette its cultural reputation, and it affects only 10 to 15% of people who have Tourette syndrome, which means roughly 85 to 90% of people with Tourette's never experience it. Let me say that again. The symptom everybody associates with Tourette's, which is shouting offensive words, is absent in a vast majority of people who have the condition. For the minority who do experience coprolalia, here's what the research tells us about how it works. The brain, when it's under pressure of the tic, reaches for the most forbidden, most socially charged word available in the person's cultural vocabulary. It's not random, it gravitates towards taboo, which is why the words that emerge are often the worst words that exist in that person's language and social environment. In English, in 2026, racial slurs are among the most taboo words that exist. So neurologically, they become candidates. It's not about the person's beliefs. It's about the brain being under neurological distress and it grabs for the highest voltage word it can find. And critically, for people who genuinely experience coprolalia, it's deeply distressing. This is not a release. This is not someone letting something slip and hiding behind a diagnosis. The research and the testimony of people living with this condition are consistent. They are mortified. They do not want to say these things, and they often feel shame and grief about the words that come out of them. John Davidson himself, after the BAFTAs, released a statement saying that he was deeply mortified and that his words were not a reflection of his personal beliefs. So let's go back to that hall at the Royal Festival Hall in London. John Davidson was not a gatecrasher. He was not an unknown person. He was the reason the film was there. He was there as an executive producer, and his story was the nominee. The host of the show, Alan Cumming, had actually warned the audience before the ceremony that tics and involuntary language could occur, and the audience was applauding for him. This was a man celebrated for his advocacy work around Tourette's and who had spent years raising public awareness about a condition that had defined his whole life. And in the middle of that ceremony, while Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, two black men, stood on that stage, a racial slur came out of the audience. And so the question of whether John Davidson's tick was genuine is not really the controversy here. His history, his diagnosis, the context of that evening, these are not in serious doubt. The controversy is everything around it. The BBC, for example, had a 2 hour delay. They broadcasted it anyway. They edited out other outbursts from that evening, but not this one. Michael B. Jordan and Delroy heard it. Other Black attendees heard it, and millions more heard it at home, unbleeped. BAFTA and the BBC both issued apologies. The BBC later edited it from their streaming platform and launched an investigation as to why it was broadcast at all. But the question that should have been asked before the ceremony was, knowing John Davidson was attending and knowing the nature of his condition, what systems were put in place to protect the other people in that room? Because disability inclusion and racial protection are not competing values. They are both owed to the people in that space. Now, let me also talk about something separately because John Davidson's case, as complicated as it is not the only conversation we need to have. Tourette syndrome has increasingly been invoked as an explanation, sometimes a self diagnosis, in moments when someone says something racist, something homophobic, something cruel, and then says, I have Tourette's, I can't help it. And I need to be clinical about this because the disorder is real and it deserves protection from misuse. So here is what genuine coprolalia looks like. We know that it is often very distressing to the person experiencing it. It occurs as part of a broader pattern of tics. It's not just vocal outbursts, but motion tics as well. And it does not appear selectively in convenient social situations. It has a history, usually from childhood, and usually from when the diagnosis is documented. And the person is not usually calm before or laughing after it happens. They're usually mortified. Now, this is what misuse of coprolalia looks like. Usually, it only surfaces when an offensive remark needs to be in defense. There is no broader tick history. The person is not distressed, which means they're not really explaining why that happened. And it appears once again in a particular context and then disappears. And there are no other ticks associated with it. A tick usually does not choose its target based off of who's in front of you. A tick is not socially aware. If someone only ticks when they need an alibi, that's not Tourette syndrome. That's accountability avoidance with a medical costume. And the reason this matters is not just fairness in individual cases, is because every false claim erodes the credibility of people with genuine diagnosis who are already fighting to be believed. So, can Tourette's make you racist? The answer is no and yes. And it depends entirely on what you mean by that question. Tourette syndrome can cause a person to say a racial slur. That is documented and that's neurological, and that has nothing to do with what the person believes or who they are. Tourette syndrome cannot cause a person to hold a racist worldview, it cannot produce an ideology, and it cannot manufacture hatred. What it can produce is utterance, and these are different things. And collapsing them together does harm in both directions. If this video made you think about that whole situation differently, share it and subscribe for more videos like this. Stay healthy.